I have witnessed a lot in my 43 years sitting on the bench. I have watched people lie straight into my eyes, shed tears that were clearly rehearsed, and attempt every possible trick they could imagine to dodge accountability. But never, in all the decades I have worn this robe, had anyone ever pointed a loaded firearm at me inside my own courtroom. Until the morning of October 17, 2023, at precisely 9:47 a.m. That was the moment when Police Chief Richard Vandermeer walked into my Providence courtroom and made the single worst decision of his entire life. You might think you have heard outrageous courtroom stories before. Believe me when I say this, you have not seen anything like this one. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now, because what I am about to share will completely change how you look at power, authority, and what really happens when someone believes they are untouchable. This story spread so fast that it ended up making international headlines across 73 countries. But to understand how it reached that point, I need to take you back to where it all began. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, and my clerk handed me a case file that looked straightforward on the surface. Case number 2023, TR 8847, a traffic violation. The defendant was Richard Vandermeer, 52 years old, police chief of Westbrook, an affluent suburb located about 20 minutes outside Providence. The complainant was Officer Maria Santos, a 34-year-old Providence police officer and single mother raising two daughters, ages 6 and 8. Now, Officer Santos was not just another officer. She had completed 2 tours in Afghanistan as a military police officer before joining the Providence Police Department 7 years earlier. She worked the night shifts, the dangerous ones, the ones most officers tried to avoid, so she could spend her days with her children. Her older daughter, Emma, had been diagnosed with leukemia 2 years prior. Maria was buried under medical expenses, picking up overtime whenever it was available, and yet she never complained. Not once. Her fellow officers described her as the kind of person who would hand you her last dollar if you needed it more than she did. On September 22, 2023, at approximately 11:34 p.m., Officer Santos was running her usual patrol along Route 95 when her radar clocked a black Cadillac Escalade traveling at 97 miles per hour in a 65-mile-per-hour zone. She activated her emergency lights and initiated a stop near exit 18. The Escalade did not pull over immediately. Instead, it continued for nearly a mile and a half before finally coming to a stop on the shoulder. As Maria approached the driver's side window, she immediately recognized who was behind the wheel: Police Chief Richard Vandermeer. He was dressed in a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Maria earned in 2 months. On his wrist sat a Patek Philippe watch worth at least $80,000. The Escalade itself had custom trim and upgrades that easily pushed its value past $95,000. Maria remained respectful and professional. She greeted him politely and requested his license and registration. And that was when everything started going wrong. Vandermeer glanced at her badge, then at her face, and said something I cannot fully repeat here. He told her she was a nobody cop from a nobody department and had no business stopping someone of his status. He ordered her to get back into her little car and pretend the encounter never happened. Maria stayed calm. She explained that he had been clocked at 97 miles per hour and that she needed his documentation. Vandermeer laughed, actually laughed, right in her face. Then he said something that made my blood boil when I later read the report. He told her that her daughter's medical treatments must be expensive, and it would be unfortunate if she lost her job and her health insurance over something trivial. Let me repeat that. This man, a police chief, threatened a single mother's sick child to avoid receiving a speeding ticket. Maria's hands were trembling, but she wrote the citation anyway. She charged him with excessive speed, failure to yield to an emergency vehicle, and reckless driving. Vandermeer snatched the ticket from her hand, tore it into pieces right in front of her, threw the fragments out the window onto the highway, and drove off. Maria gathered the torn pieces, documented the entire encounter in detail, and submitted the report to her supervisor the following morning. 2 days later, her captain called her into his office. Someone from Westbrook, someone influential, had made contact. There was pressure, quiet but undeniable, to make the citation disappear. But Maria's captain, Captain Robert Chen, was old school. 28 years on the force, and he did not bend for anyone. He told Maria to proceed through the courts and promised he would support her completely. And that is how Chief Richard Vandermeer ended up standing in my courtroom that October morning. When he walked through the doors at 9:45 a.m., 2 minutes before his scheduled appearance, I could practically see the arrogance radiating off him like heat rising from summer asphalt. He wore another expensive suit. This one looked like Brioni, probably at least $6,000. His shoes were Berluti, another couple thousand. Walking beside him was his attorney, an elite private lawyer from Boston named Gregory Ashford, a man known for making problems quietly disappear for wealthy clients. Officer Santos sat in the gallery wearing her dress uniform. Her medals were pinned neatly across her chest: Combat Action Badge, Army Achievement Medal, Departmental Commendations from Providence PD. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, posture straight, eyes forward. Professional. Composed. Dignified. But I could also see the exhaustion in her face, the kind that comes from double shifts and long nights spent in hospital rooms watching your child fight for her life. I called the case. Case number 2023, TR 8847, State vs. Richard Vandermeer. The attorney rose to his feet, and Vandermeer stood beside him, but not the way most defendants stand in my courtroom. He stood as if he were doing me a favor simply by being present, as if this entire process was beneath him. I asked Officer Santos to present her testimony. She stepped forward and described the events exactly as they happened. Her account was clear, detailed, and credible. She submitted radar calibration records, dashcam footage, every piece of documentation perfectly organized. When she mentioned Vandermeer's threat about her daughter, her voice cracked just slightly for a moment. Then she regained control and continued. I have been doing this long enough to recognize truth when I hear it. And Maria Santos was telling the truth, every single word. Then it was Vandermeer's turn. His attorney attempted to speak on his behalf, but Vandermeer waved him off, literally waved off his own lawyer like he was brushing away a fly. Then he addressed me directly, and what he said is something I will never forget. He claimed the radar gun must have been malfunctioning. He insisted he was only slightly over the speed limit and suggested Officer Santos misread the equipment because she was distracted by her personal problems. He said this with a smirk, an actual smirk, while a mother sat in that courtroom worrying about her child's cancer treatments. But here is where things started to escalate. Are you still watching? Drop a comment right now and tell me what you would do if you were in my position. Would you stay calm? Would you throw the book at him? I want to know, because what happened next will challenge everything you think you know about keeping composure under pressure. I looked at Vandermeer and asked him a simple question. Did he threaten Officer Santos regarding her employment and her daughter's health insurance? He did not hesitate. He said he may have mentioned that making accusations against a police chief could have professional consequences for her career. He said it like it was perfectly reasonable, as if threatening a woman's sick child was just standard business practice. His attorney's face turned pale. Even this high-priced Boston lawyer knew his client had essentially admitted to witness intimidation in open court. But Vandermeer did not stop. He continued, saying Officer Santos should be more careful about who she pulls over. That some people in law enforcement have more important responsibilities than dealing with minor traffic stops. I felt my jaw tighten. I have served as a judge for more than 4 decades. My father was a judge before me. He taught me that everyone, and I mean everyone, stands equal before the law. It does not matter whether you are a janitor or a police chief. It does not matter if you drive a battered Honda or a customized Escalade. Inside my courtroom, the rules apply the same to everyone. But I remained calm. I requested the dashcam footage Officer Santos had submitted. We played it on the courtroom screen. And I can tell you, the footage was worse than the written report. You could hear everything. Vandermeer's tone. His threats. The mocking laughter when he tore up the citation. You could see Maria's hands shaking as she struggled to remain professional while he threatened her child. When the video ended, the courtroom fell completely silent. Even Vandermeer's polished attorney looked uncomfortable. But Vandermeer himself appeared bored, glancing down at his phone under the table as if this was all a waste of his valuable time. I asked if he had anything further to add. He stood again, and this time his tone shifted, sharper, more aggressive. He talked about his 27 years in law enforcement. He reminded everyone he was the chief of a department serving one of the wealthiest communities in the state. He said he knew the governor personally, played golf with 2 state senators, and had dinner with the mayor of Providence twice a year. Then he looked straight at me and said something that crossed a line I did not even realize could be crossed. He said I was just a traffic court judge dealing with small-time nonsense, and I should be realistic about who I was dealing with. He said, "People at my level don't answer to people at your level." Those were his exact words. People at his level do not answer to people at my level. The courtroom went completely silent. I saw Officer Santos close her eyes like she could barely process what she had just heard. I noticed the court officers, my bailiffs, people I had worked alongside for years, tense up instantly. Everyone in that room could feel the shift in the air. Something was about to happen. Nobody knew what, but we all felt it. I took a slow breath. I looked directly at this man, this police chief who truly believed he was untouchable, and I began to speak. I told him that inside my courtroom, there are no levels. I told him that the badge he wears is supposed to stand for something. It is meant to represent service, protection, and integrity, not threats against single mothers, not abusing authority to intimidate someone who is simply doing her job. And then, as if the universe itself had decided to write the most dramatic sequence imaginable, something occurred that nobody inside that courtroom expected. My clerk received an urgent communication and handed me a note. I read it once, and then I read it again to make sure I had not misunderstood. The FBI had been investigating Chief Vandermeer for the past 8 months. Case number FBI 2023, CR 3342. The investigation involved allegations of corruption, evidence tampering, and abuse of authority. There were multiple complaints, many from officers within his own department. Federal investigators had been quietly building a case, gathering evidence piece by piece, and they were planning to arrest him within the next 2 weeks. But here is the part that changed everything. When my clerk received that message, it included an urgent addendum. FBI agents were already on their way to my courtroom. They had been monitoring the situation, and based on Vandermeer's statements that morning, combined with his threatening behavior toward Officer Santos, they decided to accelerate their timeline. They were executing the arrest warrant immediately. I will admit something honestly. In 43 years on the bench, I had never experienced anything like that. A federal arrest warrant being executed live in my courtroom. But I am not someone who wastes an opportunity for a teaching moment. If you are still with me right now, you are about to hear about the moment millions of people later watched online. This is the exact point where everything went viral. But before we get there, do me a favor, like this video if you believe that nobody, absolutely nobody, is above the law. Not because of a badge. Not because of money. Not because of connections. Hit that like button and show everyone that real justice still matters. I looked at Vandermeer and told him that before I issued my ruling on the traffic violations, additional information had come to the court's attention. He looked irritated, like I was wasting more of his valuable time. His lawyer, however, looked uneasy, like he sensed trouble but did not yet know what form it would take. I explained that the court had received information regarding pending federal charges and that FBI agents were currently en route and would arrive shortly. Vandermeer's expression changed instantly. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced first by confusion, then fear, then pure anger. He jumped to his feet so fast that his chair scraped loudly across the floor. He started shouting, actually shouting, inside my courtroom. He claimed this was a setup, a witch hunt. He said I had no authority to detain him for federal agents. His attorney grabbed his arm, trying to calm him down and get him seated again, but Vandermeer shoved him aside. He began moving toward the exit, announcing that he was leaving and that if anyone attempted to stop him, he would have their badges taken. My bailiff, Officer Marcus Thompson, a former Marine with 15 years of distinguished service, stepped directly in front of the doorway. Thompson is a large man, about 6'4", and he blocked the exit with his body alone. He calmly told Vandermeer that he needed to remain in the courtroom. And that was the exact moment Richard Vandermeer made the decision that destroyed his entire life. He reached inside his jacket, pulled out his service weapon, a Glock 19, and pointed it straight at me. At me, sitting on the bench. A loaded firearm aimed at a judge in a courtroom full of people. Everything slowed down. I heard someone scream from the gallery. I saw Officer Santos jump to her feet. I watched my bailiffs react instantly, drawing their own weapons. Officer Thompson had his gun aimed at Vandermeer in less than 2 seconds. But I did not move. I sat there on that bench, staring down the barrel of that gun, completely still. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but my hands did not shake. My voice did not crack. I looked him directly in the eyes and said one word: don't. For about 5 seconds, maybe less, maybe more, time stopped existing. Vandermeer stood there with his gun pointed at me, his hand trembling, his face red with panic and rage. The bailiffs had surrounded him, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands. Drop the weapon. Put the gun down now. Get on the ground. And then, like someone had cut the strings holding him up, his arm fell. The gun slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a sharp metallic clatter. Officer Thompson moved faster than I have ever seen anyone move. Within seconds, he had Vandermeer face down on the ground with his hands cuffed behind his back. I actually counted. From the moment the gun hit the floor until the cuffs clicked shut, it took exactly 9:45 seconds. That was it. From the moment Richard Vandermeer pulled that weapon until he was under arrest, 45 seconds. 45 seconds that felt like 45 hours. 45 seconds that ended a career, shattered a reputation, and proved once and for all that nobody stands above the law. The courtroom exploded into chaos. People were crying, shouting, trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Officer Santos had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. My clerk was already on the phone with emergency services. The bailiffs kept Vandermeer pinned to the ground while waiting for backup. And me. I remained seated at the bench, hands flat on the desk, trying to steady my breathing. I have been threatened before. I have had defendants yell at me, curse me, promise revenge. But I had never had a gun pointed directly at my face. Never felt that specific mix of terror, anger, and determination not to show fear. Within 3 minutes, FBI agents rushed through the courtroom doors. Special Agent Patricia Moreno, the lead investigator on Vandermeer's case, took one look at the situation and immediately assumed control. Vandermeer was read his rights for the federal charges already pending against him. Then Officer Thompson added the new charges: assault with a deadly weapon on a judge, brandishing a firearm inside a courthouse, attempted intimidation of a judicial officer. The list kept growing. You know what is incredible? Are you still watching this? If you have made it this far, you are part of something bigger than just a video. You are part of a community that believes in accountability, in justice, in the simple truth that actions have consequences no matter who you are. Subscribe to this channel and join thousands of others who believe truth matters. Turn on that notification bell, because stories like this deserve to be heard. As they pulled Vandermeer to his feet, he looked at me one final time. The arrogance was gone. The smugness was gone. All that remained was a broken man who had finally realized he had destroyed everything. His career, his reputation, his freedom, all within 45 seconds. Special Agent Moreno approached the bench and apologized for the disruption. She explained they had been investigating Vandermeer for months. It turned out he had been running a protection racket in Westbrook. Local business owners were paying him for guaranteed police presence at their establishments. He had tampered with evidence in DUI cases for wealthy residents who donated to his police foundation. He had intimidated officers within his own department who questioned his actions. Officer Santos was not his first victim. She was simply the first one brave enough to stand up publicly. There were 6 other officers who had filed confidential complaints with the FBI. 2 had been demoted after crossing Vandermeer. 1 had been fired under false accusations. Another had been threatened so severely that he transferred to a department 3 states away just to escape. The FBI had been building their case carefully, methodically, monitoring communications, tracking financial records, interviewing witnesses. They already had everything they needed. They were simply waiting to make the case airtight. But when they learned about his court appearance that day, they positioned agents nearby just in case. They listened to the courtroom audio feed. They heard him confess to intimidating Officer Santos. They heard him threaten me, disrespect the court, and show absolutely no remorse. And then, of course, he pulled a gun on a judge in front of witnesses and cameras. That was the final piece, the cherry on top of an already massive criminal case. After the FBI took Vandermeer away, I called a 15-minute recess. I needed a moment to gather myself. I went into my chambers, sat behind my desk, and just breathed. Now my hands were shaking. The adrenaline was fading, and reality was settling in. Someone had pointed a gun at me, inside my own courtroom, the place meant to represent safety, order, and justice. My clerk brought me water. Officer Thompson checked to make sure I was okay. Officer Santos stood outside my door, and when I invited her in, she broke down crying. She apologized. She said this was all her fault, that if she had just let the ticket go, none of this would have happened. I stopped her immediately. I told her none of this was her fault. Not even a little. She did her job, correctly, professionally, and bravely. She stood up to a bully who was used to people backing down. She refused to compromise her integrity even when threatened. She represented exactly the kind of police officer every community deserves. What happened next might surprise you. Actually, this next part is probably the most important section of this entire story. But before I share it with you, I need you to do something. Share this video. Send it to someone who needs to hear this message. Post it on your social media. Let people know that justice is still possible, that courage still matters, and that standing up to bullies is worth it, even when it feels terrifying. Share this video right now. After I gathered myself, I returned to the courtroom. By that point, news cameras were already outside. Word had spread quickly about what had happened, but I still had unfinished business to handle. I called Officer Santos back to the stand. I informed her that I was entering a finding of guilty on all charges against Richard Vandermeer related to the traffic violations, excessive speed, failure to yield, reckless driving, and I added an additional charge for destruction of a traffic citation, which I had personally observed him commit on the dashcam footage. But beyond the legal ruling, there was something more I wanted to say for the record. I wanted everyone watching, everyone listening, and everyone who might ever hear about this case to understand something fundamental about justice. I stated that Officer Maria Santos represented everything that is right about law enforcement. She served her country in combat. She served her community with dedication. She worked exhausting hours to support her family while her daughter fought cancer. And when she faced corruption and intimidation from someone with greater power and wealth, she did not hesitate. She did what was right, even though it could have cost her everything. Then I said that Richard Vandermeer represented everything that is wrong with the abuse of authority. He used his position not to serve, but to intimidate. He used his badge not to protect, but to threaten. He believed his title made him exceptional, that his connections made him untouchable, that his wealth placed him above the rules that apply to everyone else. And I said that what happened in that courtroom that day proved something I have believed my entire life. There are no special people in the eyes of justice. There are no untouchables. There is no amount of money, no political connection, no position of authority that puts anyone above the law. The federal charges against Vandermeer were extensive: corruption, racketeering, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, abuse of power, and now assault on a judicial officer with a deadly weapon. When everything was finalized, he was facing 37 separate federal charges, along with the state charges I had already found him guilty of. His trial took place 6 months later, and I followed it closely. The evidence was overwhelming. Former officers from his department testified. Business owners described the protection payments they had been forced to make. Financial experts demonstrated the money trail in detail. And of course, there was the courtroom video showing him pulling a gun on a judge. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on every count. Judge Patricia Morrison, the federal judge presiding over his case, sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison. 18 years. He would be 70 years old before he was even eligible for parole. His pension was revoked. His law enforcement certification was permanently stripped. He lost everything. And Officer Maria Santos? She received a bravery commendation from the Providence Police Department. The FBI awarded her a civilian citation for her cooperation in the investigation. She was promoted to sergeant 6 months later, and the police union, along with several community organizations, raised over $200,000 to help cover her daughter Emma's medical expenses. Emma is doing better now, by the way. The last update I received was that she had been in remission for 8 months. She was back in school, playing soccer, living the life of a normal kid again. And her mother gets to come home after her shifts knowing she did the right thing, that she stood up when it mattered and refused to let a bully win. I think about that day often. I think about those 45 seconds when everything hung in the balance. I think about what could have gone wrong. That gun could have discharged. People could have been injured. The situation could have escalated into tragedy. But I also think about what went right. A good officer did her job despite threats. A court system supported her. Federal investigators did their work patiently and thoroughly. And when a man with power tried to use violence to escape accountability, the system responded exactly as it should. Here is what I have learned in my 43 years on the bench. Justice is not automatic. It does not simply happen because laws exist or because courts and judges exist. Justice happens because people choose to make it happen. People like Officer Santos, who refused to be intimidated. People like the officers who testified against their own chief. People like the FBI agents who spent months building an airtight case. People like my bailiffs who risked their lives to protect others. Justice is a choice. Every single day, in every situation, we choose whether to stand up for what is right or to look the other way because it feels easier, safer, or more convenient. We choose whether to hold people accountable or to excuse their behavior because of their position, wealth, or connections. And this is what I want everyone watching to truly understand. You might not be a judge, a police officer, or an FBI agent. You may never find yourself in a dramatic courtroom confrontation. But you will face moments in your life when you must choose between what is easy and what is right. You will encounter bullies who think they are untouchable. You will witness injustice and have to decide whether to speak up or remain silent. In those moments, remember Officer Maria Santos. Remember that she was exhausted, afraid, financially struggling, and facing threats involving her sick child, and she still chose to do the right thing. She did not back down. She did not compromise. She stood firm. That is the real lesson here. Not the dramatic arrest. Not the viral footage. Not even the satisfying ending where the wrongdoer goes to prison. The lesson is that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they refuse to accept the idea that some individuals are above the rules. My father used to tell me something when I was young. He would say that the courtroom is the final place where everyone is truly equal. In the outside world, money, power, and connections can create advantages. But inside a courtroom, when you stand before justice, none of that matters. It is just you, the law, and the truth. I have spent my career trying to live up to that principle, making sure that everyone who walks through my courtroom doors, whether rich or poor, powerful or powerless, receives the same fairness and dignity. It is not always easy. There is pressure from many directions, sometimes subtle, sometimes obvious, to make exceptions for certain people. But cases like this remind me why I cannot do that, why I will not do that. Because the moment we start believing that some individuals deserve special treatment, the moment we accept that wealth or position places someone above accountability, we lose everything that makes justice meaningful. Richard Vandermeer believed he was special. He thought his badge was a shield instead of a responsibility. He thought his connections would protect him. He believed he could threaten and intimidate his way out of consequences. And for a while, it probably worked. People likely backed down. Citations probably disappeared. Complaints may have been buried. Until he encountered someone who refused to back down. Someone who valued her duty more than she feared his threats. Someone who trusted that the system, despite its flaws, would ultimately function the way it was meant to. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If you believe in real justice, if you believe courage and integrity still matter, then I want you to do 3 things. First, subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this. Second, leave a comment telling me about a time you saw someone stand up for what is right despite the cost. And third, watch the next video that is about to appear on your screen, because I have another story about justice that will restore your faith in humanity. It is about a homeless veteran who was disrespected in my courtroom, and what I did about it will shock you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about these stories. And thank you for believing that we can create a world where justice is not just a word, but a reality for everyone.